Hey, how are you doing? I'm Vasco Duarte, your host on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and I've got some exciting news. So right now, as I record this, I'm holding in my hand the signed contract for our very first Global Agile Summit. We're all in, and I couldn't wait to share this news with you. So mark your calendars, May 18th to 20th of 2025 in Tallinn, Estonia. We're going to have a transformative experience. We're putting together an event that it's all about real-life Agile. It's not theory or buzzwords. It's practitioners sharing what's working, what's making an impact, and how they've overcome challenges that you too will have to face, or maybe even facing right now. We're bringing together the best stories in Agile, from product leaders to engineering wizards to business visionaries. These will be stories that will inspire you to action. This isn't just another conference. It's a chance to connect with the people that are shaping the future of Agile. And here's the best part. Right now, we're in our super early bird phase. And that means you can grab tickets at just 25% of the final price. Look, that's not just half off. It's half off of the half off. It's an incredible deal for our dedicated community members, just like you, listening to this right now. So at the summit, day one will be all about hands-on workshops. And days 2 and 3 will dive into leadership, product strategy, coding, testing, and everything that makes Agile thrive in organizations right now. Remember, these are all first-person, real-life stories. Now, whether you're a leader, a developer, or part of a consulting company, this event is built to take your Agile game to the next level. So don't wait. Go to globalagilesummit.com and grab your ticket today. Let's all make 2025 the year Agile truly transforms your teams, your business, and our industry. I'll see you all in Tallinn. And remember, go to globalagilesummit.com and get your super early bird ticket right now. It will only be available until the agenda is announced. So don't wait. Grab it right now. Right, now that that's out of the way, on to the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special CTO series episode. And joining us for this episode is a very old colleague from many years ago. We worked together at Nokia, Sergey Gerasimenko. Hey, Sergey, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vasco. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Sergey's career has taken him to be the innovative CTO at CrateDB, which is leading the charge in real-time analytics and hybrid search. Previously, he was a VP of engineering at MongoDB, shaping the edge device strategy, and at Realm before that, the leading open source mobile and embedded database that was acquired by MongoDB in 2019. With a career spanning groundbreaking roles also at Brainly and Nokia, Sergey co-founded 2 companies and even holds a patent. His leadership continues to push the boundaries of tech innovation. And today we're going to explore all of the lessons that he's collected over the years. So Sergey, let's take a minute. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and share with us a pivotal moment that you think defined your approach to leadership and technology.
Thanks, Vasco. Very kind words. Probably it's easier to start again going back to Nokia. That was by far probably the most defining chapter of my career that shaped a lot. So probably for the listeners, like we know with Vasco each other from, probably like 15 years ago, back in the Nokia times when we've been building one of the open source phones. They were about to release. And I think like the pivotal moment for me over there was actually the fact that I started to work with a very, very talented people manager, Sotiris. Vasco probably also remembered this person as well. And one thing that I learned over there is that Sotiris had a very interesting approach for running his team. He was responsible for the application divisions over there. And what he was doing is that he was trying to combine several properties of being a servant of his team, being a cheerleader, constantly trying to pump up the atmosphere and just make sure everybody's like chunking along together. But at the same time, also being a chief strategist, the person was absolutely unique with trying to figure out what we actually should be doing next. And this was like, this just as an example of like how our team leadership can be done was probably very, very impactful for me for all those years, at least, when I was reflecting back on it. And then for the technology itself, I think Nokia's story is also somehow pivotal over here. Like one thing that you can learn is that it doesn't really matter how great products you have. Lack of marketing and the lack of product adoption is something that fundamentally destroys no matter what great product you would have. And my Nokia story started way before also the Intel Migo days. It was also in the research division in the Nokia Research Center. And like there were just so many absolutely great, unique, incredible products. Like we built one of the first home automation systems that's like very, very close to what Apple is doing with the HomeKit right now. Sorry. But we built it in 2007, 2008, like almost like 10 years ago before they started. Like Nokia made one of the first internet tablets, this 7710. Nokia made one of the first tablets, 770. It's like, it went almost completely unnoticed up until iPad took the throne. And, the same story with the phone that we were building, the N900 and N9 that had absolutely revolutionary user interface. If you think of it, right, this whole swipe gesture is something that actually powers the iPhone right now. Like they
and Android as well.
10 and Android, right? Like, so the whole interface completely buttonless was something that we already had implemented in 2010, 2011.
And one of the cool things about having worked back then, at least for me, and I remember you were there as well, so you probably saw the same, was the fact that all around you, there were, extremely large amounts of super intelligent, super dedicated, super motivated team members, right? I remember when we worked together in the open source based phones, that like everywhere I looked, there were like people who wanted to make a difference, who believed in what they were doing and were really pushing the boundaries. But it does come back to this idea, and I think you mentioned it already, that it doesn't matter how good your product is. What matters is how it gets adopted in the market, right? And when you think about, the work that you're doing these days at CrateDB and before at MongoDB and Realm, what have you learned about that aspect for your work as a CTO, as a VP of engineering, when it comes to making sure that it's not enough to have good technology and good products? We need to make sure that they actually have a market.
Well, that's a kind of tough one because, typically the problem of the product market fit is something that is very, very well explored for the B2C, for the typical product companies out there, right? You need to identify the user, you need to run A/B experiments, you need to figure out whether people actually would be able to pay for it or not. With technology, like with the pure technological companies, things are a little bit more tricky in the end. And what has happened with Realm, for example, just as an example, back in the day, let's say 2017, 2018, the size of the marketing team that they had was actually almost equivalent to the size of the engineering team. And the marketing team that they had a very interesting title. They were all called product engineers. So effectively, it was a handful of very, very hands-on engineers who were just ready to build demos, who were ready to talk on the conferences, who were ready to present at various meetups, and just run with the story of just popularizing and adopting the product that they built. So that's a form of a DevRel of sorts. MongoDB also did a very, very similar work in more or less the same timeline. Also, that's something that led towards the adoption of the documents model. And this is also to a degree what we are trying to do right now with the CrateDB, because CrateDB itself is not particularly well-known database. But when you start looking into the capabilities, you'll see a lot of absolutely outstanding qualities.
So one of the things that, from what you share here, is I hear that it's very important to understand how the product gets adopted, who does the adoption, and then also how to engage them, right? Is that something you regularly think about and worry about as a CTO?
Yes, maybe I worry about it also sometimes way too much. I think you mentioned, right, like, I have a 2 startups experience, and both of them were unfortunately something that we needed to shut down. Just again, because we couldn't really scale that product market fit well enough. So this is just something that I think deeply affected me in the way how I think. So when it comes again to technological products, there are usually 2 motions. There is a top-down and there is a bottom-up motion. So the top-down is typically, when you sell a database where you talk about the database, you need to go to somebody who you would identify as a decision maker, right? So like a CTO or VP of engineering or CIO or something like that. And typically, they're in a very, very different world from the actual developers. They are sometimes, only sometimes, people who actually can advocate for the particular technological choice within the company. Usually, they just need to get to know about something and they need to be comfortable with it. The actual people who really, really push technology inside of any organizations is the actual developers. And this is where the bottom-up motion comes in, right? So because in most of the cases, it would be development team who would come to the VP of engineering with the stories like, hey, our search technology is just not really working particularly well. We have to replace it. And here are 2 options that we looked into. Can you help us getting a quotes and talking to the salespeople that they have over there? So doing the top-down motion is usually very straightforward, right? This is this classical marketing approach of like, let's write something on Twitter, let's write something on LinkedIn, let's write some white papers, let's go to some AWS summit-like conference and present our solutions. So this is just builds our general awareness among the let's call it senior decision makers. But then there is the actual developer adoption, right? Because it's not enough for the developer just to figure out that like yet another database exists over there. There are like 200-300 database products out there. The tricky part over there is exactly the adoption. So from the moment that they hear about it to actually trying to use it for something meaningful. And this is very, very, very tricky thing where you have to advocate a lot on the quality that you bring in, to the unique features that you bring, to how you specifically actually going to make the life of a particular engineer easier than it was before. So those are, to a very large degree, actually, like, pretty much direct products questions, because, what we're talking about is how developer experience changes by using the product that you have. And it's not enough that it just does what the other databases do, right? Stores data. To some degree, like all the databases out there, just glorified spreadsheets with like a lot of stuff built on top of them to make sure that they can work and they scale, right? But like how individual developer will experience the product. I think this is the most important thing that pretty much everybody in the technology industry should be worried about every day.
I'm pretty sure that when you think about developer experience, I'm pretty sure that you guys have already discussed a lot to do with the latest trend at the time of recording, which is, of course, AI as an assistant for developers. Are you playing around with it? Do you have something to share with us on that space?
There is a lot, actually. So first, I think maybe a general comment, right? I personally believe that what we have with the AI right now is a lot of hype. Why? Very simple thing, just because my life personally hasn't really been transformed by the AI at all. It has been transformed by the internet completely, right? Like I'm working in their large international company sitting in Finland, like just through the means of internet, right? And this is a transformative change. With AI, the things a little bit are simpler over here. Is like, yes, I can write a better email. Yes, I can make a very, very simple sample application. Yes, I can convert natural language query to our SQL statement, but it's still not transformative. And I think the actual transformation will come in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe a little bit longer, from the developers, from the engineers who is going to be building those products that are leveraging our AI. Because again, right now, all the companies that we hear about is OpenAI, the company that actually develops the model, NVIDIA, who provides an infrastructure to run those models, and to a degree AMD, and that's about it. And this is also the niche in the industry. I think it's very, very important to be the solution provider that leverages some certain technological trends. And in our case, we're exactly a database that enables their AI workflows. So we're naturally suited for machine learning. We're naturally suited for the machine learning operations. And this is also where the real-time analytics comes in, because in order for you to extract the value of the data that you have on your business, you need to have a very, very fast access to operational data that you have, that you can feed into the AI model, that you can figure out then whether you need to stock up more items if you're running a store, or whether something got broken in your logistical chain. So again, using AI per se over here, sometimes an overkill, like if you're doing a time series workload and you want to have just predictability or the forecast, you can achieve it with many other solutions. But I think simplicity or the usability of the various UI models that we can bring in is something that will help people though building the applications that are really, really transformative. So again, what are we trying to do is to stay in the space. This is where CrateDB is a natural fit, just because we have the vector store functionality. We can power any kind of retrieval augmented workflows out there. We can have vector search. We can have hybrid search. But we're still in the business of building the middleware for people who are building applications that leverage this AI.
When we talk about AI, which is just one of the many technology trends that are out there for your business specifically, and also in general, of course, for your role as a CTO, you need to figure out, okay, how do I balance this following the tech trends and understanding how they can benefit us and our customers versus broader business objectives, like, whatever that might be, including specific partnerships or enabling entrance in some certain markets or whatever that is. So how do you make sure, as the CTO at CrateDB, how do you make sure, and what processes have you implemented to balance out the tech focus that you need to have with the broader business objectives, and of course, at the same time, remaining agile enough to adapt to change, because as soon as you start working on something, it will change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are three answers. I'll try to stack them in order. So the first one is, being the part of executive team, of course, helps a lot to try to figure out where the strategy goes. So this is where you're not just handed over a thing and saying, now please execute the strategy X that we just come up with. So being able to actually shape it based on what you see on the market, based on what you actually hear, where you think you should be developing a product, is very, very helpful. But still, ultimately you end up with some sort of a document with an explanation of what the company strategy is, right? Whether you contributed it or not. And this is where it kind of gets interesting, where the kind of theoretical plan needs to really get transformed into a reality. We tried multiple things over multiple companies. We tried working with the OKRs, where you would break down the original, the company narrative into a set of strategic objectives, then try to cascade them to the specific departments, then cascade them to specific teams, to cascade them to specific individuals. So this is all great, but it always comes at a certain limitations. First of all, is that you actually have to do a lot of work of trying to figure out those specific KPIs, right? Because it's not just an objective, you actually have to measure it. And sometimes you cannot really measure things. Sometimes the objective is really just get the thing done and release, and that's about it. And you can have an arbitrary adoption rate attached to it, but it's very, very artificial. And I think everyone involved in the process just notice that there is a lot of this artificiality, if it's an English word in general, in it. So something that we eventually ended up working at Realm, at MongoDB, and to some degree at Crate as well, is a slightly different approach that would be perhaps would be a riff of an RFC process from the open source community. So how it works is that we do sit down and we do write a company mission and vision statement for a year ahead. But after that, what needs to happen is that every single product line needs to write up an actual narrative that explains what specifically they're thinking they would be doing. But it's not a roadmap, right? It's not just an explanation of the roadmap per se. It's just a high level thing. So if we just say that we want to invest into particular areas, we need to have an answer for the how particular database fits into the AI development workflow, that would be the actual high level strategic objective. But then what needs to happen is that you start writing strategic narrative documents, which is a 1 or 2 pager, that then starts listing potential initiatives that you actually can implement towards it. And then that becomes something similar perhaps to a product backlog to a very, very, very high degree. And once you have this product backlog, then you actually can go to the teams. And when you go there, they don't see like, here's 5 objectives. Could you please do something with them? They actually see a story that they can relate to, the story that they can read to, that is written in a document. And then there is just a list of theoretical projects that they can pick up. And sometimes this is not exhaustive, right? Like, sometimes team also can come up with quite a lot of information. Like, you not always sit in the ivory tower and know everything that needs to happen. And then like when you do this quarterly planning, like we still have our cadence of doing things in the quarters. You go through the strategic narrative, you try to pick up those initiatives that are actually aligning with the overall business objectives. And then you do it in a very collaborative fashion to make sure that when the team starts doing the planning, you also try to include all the, let's call it decision makers from the company. So they would be aware of the conversation that led into choosing some of the initiatives against the others. And when you do, then, effectively what you try to do is to defend the plan, at least, for the 2 months in a row, because yes, you're absolutely right. Something will happen. There will be like, yet another customer requirement that we haven't thought of or some, drastic change. But I think the idea there is that once you lock in this quarterly plan, you try to communicate it and you really try to stick to it unless you actually see substantial, let's call it a business risk thing popping up, right? Like, so something that absolutely fundamentally changes what you thought about. If it's just a feature that you forgot to add, fine, probably we can wait for the next 3 months and then include it into the next quarterly plan. So in this case, I think the balancing act over here is pretty much on the product managers, on the engineering managers, on the team as well, to be able to advocate for the necessity of sticking to the plan that has been chosen. And, if in 2 weeks after doing the planning, you actually have doubts whether you plan things correctly, then it just brings the question, how are you doing planning in the first place? Probably like.
So on that vein, Sergey, in that narrative that you document and then distribute and kind of cascade through the discussions to the teams, do you have like an explicit part of that? Not just vision and mission, of course, but also like when you consider the initiatives and the trade-offs you need to make when you choose one over the other. Do you explicitly set out the assumptions that, if proven not to be true, would invalidate the decisions made?
Sometimes. So it goes a little bit more depth over here. So let's just say that we would write the strategic document. We would come up with like 5, 6 high-level business goals that we would want to focus on. Then we would have those like more specific tactical initiatives. And those business goals, by the way, they're not necessarily limited to just engineering. Like, the same framework just apply for the entire company. Like, the overall business goals of having, employment satisfaction rate at X number, right? So when you pick up those initiatives, you never say that we're just going to complete it in the next 9 months, just because majority of those initiatives are fairly large. And you're absolutely right. In many cases, you actually have to validate whether what you're planning to do is feasible. So this is where you start breaking it into a set of steps. And instead of saying we're going to be working on a very, very large database feature for the entire year, you say that we're going to break it down into a set of incremental steps where we would be doing an assessment at the end of each step. And the first one will be we're building a general proof of concept implementation where we could try to validate whether the whole approach actually makes sense. Then you would get into our more of an initial implementation that you would be able to pass to a set of customers and call it a preview, alpha, or anything in between. And then there would be a more longer stretch where you would make sure that the feature that you're releasing actually has enough of quality, whether it actually has all the functionality that you would need to have. And the key word here is to have enough of those checkpoints and never assume that somebody will just work with the idea that you're just building the feature and it will be ready exactly in a year, just because you said that
it makes sense, right? Like it's useful to have it in a year. Let's put 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, this is the part where things like you end up with a deadline-driven development, and with engineering, like especially with the database engineering, like something that's perhaps I'm most familiar with right now. It's not something that you really want to end up with. like at MongoDB, for example, like back when we joined, like the company worked in an annual cycle where releases were done once in a year just because there was an annual conference. But even then, when you try to push the release for the specific deadline, it was absolutely okay to just say like, hey, this is still a preview feature, and we're going to be hardening it over the next like 3 or 6 months. So if you would want to use it, here it is. It's generally absolutely safe for the business to use, but we don't really declare it generally available.
Well, when we talk about deadline-driven development, which is something that I have used myself a lot as an anti-pattern, just to be clear on that, of course, we are also kind of referring to this figure, this tool that we use in organizations called the roadmap, right? And for you as a CTO, the roadmap has many clear and present implications on how you do your work, and then also how the teams that you work with can do their work. So how do you make sure that you are understanding the current struggles that you need to help the teams with, but also keeping your eye on the future and having kind of an understanding of where the future is leading us? How do you balance that through your roadmap process?
So that's I think another interesting question that will take quite a lot to explain. So there's another phase that mostly lays on product managers at large, but in some organizations it's a different function, and this is a competitive intelligence. So effectively, before you actually start building things, it's not enough to just talk to the customers, to just figure out what the engineering team would need to do from the sense of technical debt reduction. You also really need to understand where the market is heading and what are the trends over there, what your competition is doing, what your potential partners are doing. And that's a very tricky act. Again, depends on the size of organization. Various people can do it. If the organization is small, I think just a handful of people having a well-curated LinkedIn feed or Twitter feed or DevTools channel feed or Reddit feed or you name it, because again, if you're on the data space, you can have quite a lot of signals of where the data warehousing companies are moving. All of this information is pretty much public. You can piece the things together to figure out, what's going to happen with the data lake architecture. But at the same time, maybe the huge advantage of the database world is that it's very, very, very slow moving industry in general. An adoption of a database happens at best in 6 months from the moment that you start talking to the customers. And in many cases, if you're talking especially about a replacement, it's a year-long process, sometimes actually even longer. And this is just actually enough amount of time to catch up with everything, right? So the technological choice is very, very rarely done on just, here's the latest React framework available. Let's rewrite our applications on this particular stack. Something that happens, for example, in the front-end JavaScript world. Like every year there's something new coming up, and every year you would need to migrate from Vue to Angular or the other way around, or get into React Native, or then start using React Native components, or maybe just ditch your front-end together just because there is low-code application available right now that solves all the problems, right? I mean, it's kind of goes in circles for almost 15 years right now. Again, the database is a much, much more rigid, and this is where you get a bit more of a leeway to not be able to be reactive, where you would be able to actually see this database invests into this particular data format. Should we immediately jump the bandwagon of supporting Parquet files, or should we actually wait a little bit? And sometimes, having this, 6 to 12 months gives enough of time to figure out whether something was actually a good idea that you really need to follow.
Well, in fact, with that amount of time, you even have time to acquire a company before that becomes a huge issue in the industry.
Yeah, that's also true. Though again, integration of technological companies is
it's not a given for sure.
So yes, I think it's important to stay on top of the trends, but in a sense of just seeing where the market is heading, and then try to whenever you actually write the strategic narrative, there's also a portion, a piece, a section that says this is where we think market is heading. So hence our bets are on this. So there is always a combination, right? You never make the choices of the strategy just because you believe in it. You always need to base it on some sort, on some sort of like predicaments that you see,
Absolutely.
or hypotheses that you would want to validate.
So you say you talked several times already about this narrative, strategic narrative, and a strategic document. Can you just outline high level how your annual strategic planning works, specifically from the point of view of your role as a CTO?
So it will be a little bit tricky to explain because we're in the middle, right? We I would use a lot of vocabulary that we used at MongoDB, but at the same time at Crate, we're just getting started of establishing a handful of processes over there. So, what I will say will be something in between. So how it works for me specifically right now is that I need to sit down and write up the draft of the document, like very, very high level draft. That would include the sections of where do we think our product actually has a competitive feature, competitive functionality, like where it actually solves specific user needs. Then we could talk also about what we see if competition is doing, like what's happening on the market, how it would affect it, or our positioning, and then try to also outline what we have from the roadmap that, not the roadmap, from the list of potential projects that we can pick up in the next 6 months, right? Like when I say roadmap, I don't mean the PowerPoint slide with this, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4.
And some stars, I remember that.
Yes, and the stars and the lines of the quarters, right? I mean, those are the roadmaps that we don't have. Instead, what we have is the set of projects that we can pick up to prioritize. And typically, the amount of projects that you already have is like 2 or 3 years worth of work ahead of you, right? So the tricky part is always just picking up the things that would add a tremendous amount of value in the short term. So in this case, this high-level narrative is just more of our foundation. It's a high-level brief that explains the market state, this current state of the product, and where do we believe we actually need to invest. That's it. Like, it's not necessarily large. It's just a couple of pages. But it does have a lot of hyperlinks, asterisks, and can send people into reading a lot of additional material just in order that was used to combine it.
So if I understand correctly, that document that you just said you draft, which I guess is more focused on the technology perspective to the strategic planning, it is, as far as I understand, useful to trigger a conversation and a reflection with your peers, right? It's not like a set of decisions. It's more like this is what we see. These are our options. These are maybe the best options for the next year. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, more or less on a high level.
So, and you did say, and I really like that you did say that a roadmap for you guys is not just one PowerPoint with some lines and some stars, because I remember way back when we both looked at many of those slides, of course. You talked about having a list of potential initiatives, and I'm guessing that would be more like or very much like a strategic backlog. Is that kind of a good metaphor for it?
Yes, that would be very, very, very much high level, like 6 months worth of a project, right? So maybe also to take a step back, like remember about the elements of any kind of good strategy. There is a seminal book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and highly recommend. And the author sums it up that there are 3 key aspects there. The first one is the diagnosis, so explanation of where the things are. The second one is the guiding policy, like an explanation of what kind of criteria we will use in order to identify what we will do in order to address what we said in the diagnosis. And the third one is this coherent actions. So in our case, of course, those are this very, very specific projects that we would want to take. And again, on the CTO level, it doesn't really matter the size of the company. I mean, what you operate with is this large investment areas that you would want to look into over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, and try to pick them up and have a really, really good explanations why you're actually picking up like this work over everything else that you have on the backlog. preferably again with the with the directly translatable business value, like preferably in a way that if we do this, then we would be able to get 20% more of the market just because we have a strong demand from the customers that are not that are in our prospects list but haven't really adopted the solution.
So we're getting close to the end, Sergey, but I do want to ask you still two more questions. The first one is, when you think about your career as a technology leader and CTO, what's the biggest challenge you faced and how did you overcome it?
I'd say that the biggest challenge actually, quite ironically, is the imposter syndrome and nothing else. And this is something that comes from the fact that the role of the CTO or the head of the technology in any kind of organization is very, very overloaded. Many people assume many things, and like all time ago, I was also thinking that the CTO is the person who spends 75% time just coding things, and then 25% being the nerdest nerd available out there. And that's actually not the reality, right? And this is something that also I learned by spending the 5 years at MongoDB, and we had two very, very distinct and different CTOs. One was the founding CTO, and he was absolutely incredible from the perspective of pure technology leadership. He would be the person who would go and spend his weekend and he would come up with a half-done product that a team of 15, 20 engineers could pick it up and build up an actual product that is sold to the customers. So he was absolutely incredible in this sense, but he lacked a lot in a few other areas. And at some point of time, he decided to leave the company and work in some other place, just sort of a lifestyle choice. And we got a different person. And the different person was not a hands-on engineer at all. He was in his late 50s, very, very far in the career. But he was absolutely incredible, exactly as the team leader, as a mascot, as our cheerleader, as the person who sets up the culture, as the person who figures out how to grow the process and scale the organization. And once I saw this difference, it was also very interesting to see that the role are largely also defined by the state where the organization is. And sometimes it also defines by the amount of business change that you have in the organization. There is a really, really famous paper that is called Four Roles of the CTO, if I remember right, by an author that I actually don't remember. I need to look into my memory. Tom Berry. Now I got it. Tom Berry, the role of the CTO. And what Tom was actually talking there is that if you think of the business change and you think of the amount of the technology as a product that your organization is solving, think of this sort of, two axes, right? You can chart four high-level roles of the CTO, which would be big thinker. So this is the person who tinkers with technology, tries to figure out where the company needs to go next, prototypes something with Dendruno boards, this kind of stuff. There is an infrastructure manager. So this is the person who is mostly looking after effective use of the infrastructure that the company has, whether the data center is actually operating at the full capacity. So those kind of roles are very, very frequently connected with the consulting companies. There is externally faced technologist, and this is also another role that popularizes the role and the technology or among the public. And then the last one is called operations manager and visionary. And this is a role that actually combines a little bit of what you think you would need to be doing on the market, and at the same time, making sure that this vision can be translated into reality. And basically, this is the role that I figured out as something that I actually can add a lot of value in, because I'm not comfortable with the other three aspects at all. Speaking on public or, tweaking with their assembler on my free time at night, or looking really, really, really far into resource utilization and what are we doing with AWS, but actually figuring out where we need to go and how to transform it in the way that the organization that builds it would be inherently happy and interested and motivated is something that personally interests me. And again, what I figured out is that there are a handful of companies that actually need a person exactly like that.
Absolutely, and beautifully described. We'll put the link to the article for sure so that people can go and easily check it out. And the last question for me, you've read a lot. Obviously, you have thought a lot about the CTO role. As a leader and a CTO, what was the book that most influenced your approach to the role?
There are three. I'll make actually a handful of recommendations, but perhaps the book that affected me the most, and not as a CTO, but just as an engineering manager back in the day, there's very little difference, honestly speaking, for the role, is a book called Peopleware by a person called Tom DeMarco. And the book is written in 1987, 88. It's really, really old one. But the book was written by two consultants who made a general claim that for the software systems, the problem that are usually occurring there, they're not just because of the badly implemented architecture or some horrible decision that has been made. Majority of the technological problems in any software systems, they are actually caused by the people, by the relationships, and how they actually build the system together. So this is why they called the book Peopleware. And they stressed a lot of importance on how the work is done, the amount of interruptions that happening to the development process, all this, meetings with the managers, this schmoozing with the coffee cup, give me the status of the project. It stressed the concept of craftsmanship in the software development, where you actually need to spend enough of time building things in a way that you're actually proud of them, not just because there is a deadline and that you have to push. It stressed the importance of organizational support. So, engineering organization is really, really feeling that the work that they're doing matters, regardless, again, the type of the company. And then, over time, I read another book that was called Drive by Daniel Pink. And, it has very little to do with the technology, but it described how modern workforce treats motivation. When we shifted from the factory work, where your motivation was, you show up at the factory, you do something, you get your paycheck, you get the food, right? Where we actually shifted more into this informational age. And what Daniel Pink summarized is that there are three key factors that affect how we work and our general satisfaction with what we do. And those are autonomy, mastery, and the sense of purpose. And in this case, autonomy is that to a large degree, you're actually able to choose what you work on and how you actually build it. There is mastery, which means that, again, you have enough of time to actually build things to the state where you could be proud of them. And the sense of purpose is that no matter what kind of product you're building, you need to know that it actually adds up value to someone. You're not building it just because somebody asked you, but you really truly understand the reasons, the user needs, the application area. And then, the third one, again, not directly related to the technology, would be Jim Collins' Good to Great, just a classical read on how to build a good performing organization. And there is just one line that I want to say is that, I might misrepresent it a little bit. I read the book a very, very long time ago, but I think Jim Collins said there that it doesn't really matter where the bus is heading. What matters is what kind of people you have on the bus. So, the importance of the team, right? So it's, what kind of products you build, reflecting at our Nokia operation, right? If we wouldn't be building the phones, it wouldn't really be mattering what we would be building just because the team was absolutely great. Everybody were absolutely motivated and dedicated to building a product. And if, we would pivot it to building smart television, everybody would be probably as motivated and happy.
So some of the competitors of Nokia did do that. They pivoted to developing smart televisions, smart dishwashers, washers, and vacuum cleaners, and so on. Yeah. Sergey, it's been an absolute pleasure and very insightful conversation. If people can get in touch with you and know more about what you're doing, where could they go?
LinkedIn. Probably my LinkedIn profile is the most up-to-date and lively social media network that I'm maintaining right now. So I can provide a link that people could follow and DM me if there's any questions that they could answer.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link on the show notes. So do get in touch, and why not ask a few follow-up questions from Sergey. Sergey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you, Vasco. Thanks for having me.
Oh boy, I bet you are buzzing with ideas after listening to this episode. I know I was. Now, there are so many ways we can help the leaders we work with. So I hope this episode helped you get some of those ideas going and getting inspired, hopefully also to take action. That's what matters in the end. Don't forget that. Now, if you want to check out the key lessons from this episode, check out the show notes at scrummastertoolbox.org. But for now, I'll say goodbye and see you in the next episode. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.